לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה לך דודי לקראת כלה פני שבת נקבלה שבת שלום שבת שלום שבת שלום ומבורך שבת שלום שבת שלום שבת שלום ומבורך.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another of our YouTube stream services. I want to remind everyone who's a member that we have our annual meeting this Monday, June 21st at 7 p.m. It's on Zoom, and I hope you'll join us. I want to also suggest that you keep a close eye on our newsletter throughout the next weeks to come. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer is reopening everything beginning this Tuesday, I believe, and our committee on reopening will be meeting also this week to look at our plans for the weeks and months to come. So keep a good lookout on the newsletter. We're already open for some classes and small groups, but we are hoping to reopen for Friday nights. As much as I love sitting here in what I call Studio 2B, it is much, much more fun to gather in person and much more meaningful. Finally, tonight, I want to thank and acknowledge Kathy Radner and Russell Linden for supporting this Shabbat through their generous gift and donation as part of our spring fundraiser. I know that we'll be able to join together with them to enjoy an Oneg Shabbat very, very soon. So thank you to Kathy and Russell for sponsoring Shabbat. Let's continue now with our celebration as we light our candles.
Baruch haor ba'olam, Baruch haor ba'adam, Baruch haor b'shalom, b'shalom, Baruch haor, Baruch haor, b'shabbat.
On this Shabbat, we gather with a strong sense of gratitude. Our nation is reopening. Our families are reuniting. Science and good leadership have redeemed our hopes. And so, as we begin this Shabbat, we do so with expressions of awe and joy, a community of believers celebrating the wonders that life can offer. For the grandeur of the universe, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, we embrace gratitude. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and seasons, we embrace gratitude. For human community, our past and future hope, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility or oppression, in times of crisis and peace, we embrace gratitude. For the innumerable deeds of loving kindness which continue throughout this whole period and which we will bring into the future, we embrace gratitude. For all the joys that living brings, for resilience in the face of great difficulties, for the caring hearts of loved ones and friends, we embrace gratitude as we celebrate Shabbat. Tonight, we celebrate and welcome Shabbat, looking to this moment in time to once again gain perspective on where we've been and where we are going. On this Shabbat, may we find the space to consider and to challenge. May we have the courage to do what is right. Together, let us find meaning, calm our anxieties, understand our purpose, and appreciate our accomplishments. Let us find the strength to continue working for ourselves and others. Let us share the burdens and blessings of responsibility. Let us locate the will to change the things that we can no longer accept. Let us do all this and more, mindful that we are a community of humanistic Jewish believers, unbroken and unbowed, prepared to face all that life has in store for us. Let us strive to feel these bonds of belief and community when we are together and when we are apart. Let us rejoice in our ties. Let us rejoice in our collective power. Let us rejoice in the gift of Shabbat.
ערב של שושנים, נצא נא אל הבוסתן, מור ושנים ולבונה, לרגלך מפתן. לילה יורד לאט, ורוח שושן נושבה, הווה אלחש לך שיר בלט, זמר של אהבה.
When I was a child, my Yiddish-speaking grandfather used to say to me, "Schwer zu sein a Yid. It's tough to be a Jew." My grandfather's experience as a Jew was framed largely by the anti-Semitic exclusion that dominated American Jewish life for generations. There are those who have called anti-Semitism the world's oldest hatred. Whether that's objectively true is hard to say, but in any case, it has certainly been around for a very long time, taking hold in cultures and nations that long ago disappeared, and finding new ones to infect with, you should excuse the expression, hateful variants, religious anti-Semitism, racialized anti-Semitism, nationalized anti-Semitism, for at least 2,300 years. Indeed, it was approximately 300 BCE that one of the oldest extant libels of Jews, a protocols of the elders of Zion of its day, you might call it, when that was penned by an Egyptian priest in Alexandria, Egypt, employing hate language about Jews then that would not have been out of place in a neo-Nazi rally of the 20th century. Alexandria would also go on to be the site of what was and became thousands of anti-Jewish pogroms over the years. Uncountable numbers of anti-Semitic incidents occurred throughout the Roman Empire, and with the rise and spread of Christianity, anti-Semitism became even worse, as Christians sought to repress their Jewish competitors for believers. In some places where pre-Christian Rome had protected Jews, Christianized Rome, the Roman Empire, and its successors tolerated mass abuses. Throughout Europe, Jewish integration into greater society was stopped dead in its tracks as ghettoization efforts of one kind or another proceeded apace, concentrating Jews through restrictions on where they could live, what they could do, tolerating their presence only when local nobles stepped in to protect them due to their own financial needs or other services that the Jews could provide for them. By the Middle Ages, European Jews knew their place. They also knew that in many cases their place was barely tolerated. Those were the centuries of blood libels, of expulsions and slaughters of Jews throughout Europe. Under Islam, the Jews certainly fared better, but there was no shortage of deprivations for Jews too in many of those Islamic places. Modernity brought the promise of improvement, but particularly in Europe, which had grown to be the largest Jewish population in the world, those promises were rarely realized. Thankfully, in a more globalized world, Jews were able to seize the opportunity to seek something better, many of them searching for it in the United States. That was the era in which my grandfather and his parents arrived. It was orders of magnitude better than what they had faced in Europe, but it was also filled with anti-Semitic restrictions on where Jews could live through deed restrictions, other kinds of housing discrimination. There were employment and educational barriers, even bans on Jews in public accommodations of all kinds, and these continued well into the 20th century. American anti-Semitism was, of course, also responsible for the United States' abandonment of European Jews through those cruel limits on immigration that were imposed just when Jews needed to come here the most. The names of the xenophobes and anti-Semites who put those in place, and also who wound up opposing American intervention in what was happening in Germany with the Nazis. They called their organization America First, and their names continue to be stained with blood to this day. That things finally changed in this country was a tribute to Jewish leadership's determination to break every barrier and challenge every restriction on Jewish rights. Slowly but surely, Jews became more visible and more vocal, demanding a seat at the table. Those were the days of the firsts. The first Jew to do this, the first Jew to do that. So successful were they that by the mid-20th century, legal and societal obstacles to full Jewish participation in American life had fallen one by one until there were, more or less, none. But anti-Semitism had by no means disappeared. The world's oldest hatred does not fold up its tents quite so quickly. Today we find new generations facing an upsurge in expressions of Jew hatred of one type or another, which, quite unfortunately, can no longer be met with a unified response because under our current conditions, our community is no longer able to come together for a unified response. Now that we are expending so much energy arguing with each other about what even constitutes anti-Semitism, even as we're trying to fight it. This raises for the American Jewish community an unprecedented question. What, for us today, constitutes anti-Semitism? Now, you may be thinking to yourself, I know anti-Semitism when I see it, and perhaps you do know Jew hatred or intolerance when you experience it or you confront it. Like many Jews, you may have experienced it in small or even large ways. And let me be clear, much of what we've been experiencing is not in question. We're not arguing about whether the attack on Pittsburgh's Tree of Life Synagogue was anti-Semitic, though we did argue about what part the Trumpian rhetoric played in that. And we're not arguing about whether the man who entered a New York Hasidic neighborhood and home during Hanukkah and killed a rabbi was anti-Semitic, or whether attacks on kosher grocery stores are anti-Semitic, or whether attacks on diners at kosher restaurants are anti-Semitic, or whether the desecration or vandalism of synagogues and other Jewish institutions qualify as anti-Semitic. Attacks on Jews as Jews are always clear manifestations of Jew hatred. But increasingly, our community has splintered into disagreements that we never had before about many things, particularly statements by politicians or activists on social media or elsewhere that some Jews believe are absolutely anti-Semitic, while others are denying that altogether. Take, for example, rhetoric that many of us feel mirrors the blood libels of old, asserting the existence of Jewish cabals, sinister Jews determined to take over the world. Over the past few years on the right, we've heard a lot of this kind of talk, featuring certain prominent Jewish individuals as the enemy, powerful Jews like Michael Bloomberg or George Soros, the famously wealthy left-leaning philanthropist. Last fall, as reported in the Jewish Forward, Eric Early, a Republican candidate for Congress in California, tweeted about Soros, a Holocaust survivor, describing him as a Nazi sympathizer and a danger to our nation. Calling Soros a Nazi sympathizer is, of course, a lie, one that has been spreading around social media and right-wing circles for quite some time. But the question is being asked, is it an anti-Semitic lie? Well, Early's opponent, Adam Schiff, certainly thought so, as did many others. But Early himself is also Jewish. As the Forward opined, that's right, a Jewish congressional candidate is spreading openly anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that the ADL says have the effect of mainstreaming anti-Semitic tropes and giving support, however unwittingly, to bona fide anti-Semites and extremists who disseminate these ideas knowingly and with malice. Columnist Seth Cohen, writing in Forbes, echoed this. Behind the spectacle of paranoid outrage, there is a troubling and undeniable truth about the constant attacks on George Soros, anti-Semitism. Soros's critics barely hide their anti-Semitism anymore, he writes, frequently posting images of him with grossly distorted anti-Semitic features. The attacks also referencing directly and indirectly long-standing anti-Semitic theories from texts like the Elders of Zion that claim Jews are running an international cabal. Hatred of Soros very much echoes tropes about the Rothschilds and other historically influential Jewish individuals and families. The conspiratorial QAnon has fully adopted this. Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene referenced them with her famous space laser social media post, that bizarre post she made about the California fires. And yet there are many, many Jews who deny that these kinds of libels have anything to do with anti-Semitism. I've heard Greene's remarks defended by Jews. Many of these same folks are, however, quick to point the finger leftward, accusing, for instance, the movement for Black Lives of anti-Semitism, due to some Black Lives activists making statements about Israel which they believe to be anti-Semitic. Of course, it is true that some supporters of BLM have made statements about Israel that are exaggerated or untrue or even anti-Jewish in tone and tenor. But the focus of BLM has nothing to do with Jews or Israel. It's a diverse movement, not a top-down organization, and its activists are focused pretty squarely on systemic American racism, and they're supported by more than 600 Jewish organizations. Of course, it would be surprising if many advocates for American Black social justice reforms didn't also express support for Palestinian rights. But this brings us to the largest flashpoint of disagreement between Jews over what exactly constitutes anti-Semitism, which is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For many American Jews, including our institutional representatives like the Jewish Community Relations Councils and the ADL, there are positions on Israel and Palestine that they believe cross the line into anti-Semitism, but which other Jews do not agree upon. These include advocacy for BDS, the movement to boycott, divest from, and sanction Israel, which I have argued is a political protest against another nation, not a manifestation of Jew hatred. Another position frequently identified as anti-Semitic is promotion of a one-state scenario, a binational state, that would no longer serve the purposes of Jewish majoritarian sovereignty. It's anti-Zionism in its sense. Both of these positions, however, are also supported by Jewish voices on the left. Among the most prominent is that of Peter Beinart, a modern Orthodox Jew who has promoted both of these positions, raising the very strange question, does that make observant Jew Peter Beinart an anti-Semite? Well, at least one prominent Zionist, whom I know personally, tweeted that Beinart is a traitor to the Jewish people. Recently, I moderated a webinar about two competing working statements that were written to define what counts as anti-Semitism, with the support of Jewish leaders and scholars. One of these was issued in 2016 by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, the IHRA, a group of well over 24 national and international bodies, and it presents 11 working examples of anti-Semitism, 7 of which are related to criticism of Israel, including one that says that to deny the Jewish people their right to national sovereignty and self-determination, in other words, to oppose the project of Zionism, is by definition a racist endeavor. Beinart and some other Jews on the left very much disagree. And I would hasten to add that many Hasidic Jews also would disagree. These Jewish arguments about when and how advocating for Palestinian rights crosses the line into anti-Semitism have become louder since last month's flare-up between Israelis and Palestinians. Attacks on American Jews did indeed increase during this period and since. According to published reports, these incidents included outdoor diners in Los Angeles who were physically attacked by a group carrying Palestinian flags, violence against visibly Orthodox Jews, Haredi or Hasidic Jews in this case, who I mentioned were not in general huge Zionists, many of them are anti-Zionists, and the employment of Nazi imagery and other anti-Semitic rhetoric on synagogues and institutions that also were accompanied by calls to, quote, free Palestine. Now, these are all, I would say, considered undeniably anti-Semitic, wall-to-wall, by the Jewish community. But it raises another question. Are they to be considered representative of the growing movement for Palestinian rights? Do they really have anything to do with the opposition to people promoting BDS or a one-state solution? Well, here's an admittedly anecdotal piece of evidence from a Florida pro-Israel protest that was interrupted by a van full of counter-protesters waving the Palestinian flag. On closer examination, it's easy to see that these so-called pro-Palestinians are actually white supremacists, easily identifiable by their Nazi salutes, their Goy power slogans painted right there on their van, along with Holocaust denial and declarations that Hitler was right. How many attacks on Jews in the name of Palestinians are actually being perpetrated by white supremacists like these? How many are originating with anti-Semites, yet looking for yet another excuse simply to express their hatred of Jews? Well, we may never know. As anti-Semitism continues its millennia-old march against Jews, however, it is up to our community to be smarter about how to address it. Perhaps the best guide I've seen is the one produced as an alternative to that IHRA statement I referenced earlier. It's called the Jerusalem Declaration. It was put together by a large group of Jewish scholars and thinkers and leaders, and it states this very clearly, that while criticism of Israel and even anti-Zionism are not prima facie examples of anti-Semitism, that is not the case when criticism relies upon classical anti-Semitic stereotypes, collective Jewish responsibility for Israeli policies, or when it assumes that non-Israeli Jews, even those who support Israel, are necessarily more loyal to Israel than their own countries. Or when it comes with a demand that Jews in the state of Israel be denied their right to exist and flourish collectively and individually as Jews in accordance with the principles of equality. This morning, I talked about the surge in anti-Semitism with a beloved congregant, a concerned member of our community, and I sadly conveyed to her my view that anti-Semitism will never be vanquished. Yet I believe that is all the more reason to speak up and work against it. We don't have to surrender to it. But this will only be possible when we can put aside issues like BDS and whether or not Zionism is good for the Jewish people or good for the Palestinians, focusing less on strictly political criticism of Israel and more on locating and prosecuting those who engage in harm to Jews, and by forming alliances with those in our nation who fight all manners of hatred today. When the positions of an observant Jew like Peter Beinart are defined as anti-Semitic, when our community is hell-bent on misallocating resources to cast supporters of BDS or anti-Zionists as ipso facto anti-Semites, we are doing damage to the cause of fighting the real harm and hurt that Jew hatred has continued to cause for our people for over 2 millennia. Thanks for listening, and Shabbat Shalom. Let's continue with this beautiful song about Jewish community, Ma Tovu.
Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Likrat Shabbat, lechu v'nelcha, lechu v'nelcha. Ki mekor habracha, mekor habracha. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu ohalecha Yaakov, ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael.
When we meet each other on Shabbat, we think of shalom, of peace. It's right there in the greeting. Shabbat has always been a symbol of peace. Our ancestors called it a taste of the world to come. The peace that they sought to create on Shabbat teased them with hopes that such calm might one day prevail throughout the world. Well, perhaps that was just a fantasy, but it gave them comfort, nevertheless. Today we understand that if we desire such a world, it must come through our own work. Perhaps Shabbat can be an eternal reminder of that. In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, we extend our well wishes to these members of our community and to their loved ones, to Evelyn Krieger, Joe Gaden, Julie Eliason, Karen Tremper-Harris, and Peter Schweitzer. May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits. Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. Recalling now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight we observe the yahrzeits of Nathaniel Coburn, Teresa Ellis, Lillian Finkelstein, Sheldon Glass, Paul Kadish, Marilyn Ann Logan, Abraham Meisner, Sandra Nesseth, Irving Pinkney, Cecile Plafkin, Belle Radner, Jean Rottenberg, Anna Sherbin, Margaret Stawicki, Aviva Tepley, and Milton A. Vidra. Yehi zichram livracha, may memories of these beloved people bring a sense of comfort to those who walk the earth now in their absence. That's it for our Shabbat tonight. Once again, thank you to Kathy and Russell for sponsoring it through your generous donation, and Kathy for all the work that you do for our congregation. Thank you. We conclude with Bashana Haba'ah, the song about next year and the hopes that come with it. I think we're very, very much closer than a year to fulfilling some of our hopes to be together. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.